Welcome on into the Wolverine TV. Clayton Sayfie here with EJ Holland. Wrapping up the month that was September, we are going to break down 3 new commits in the month of September. We recorded this when there was only 2 from the month of September due to some travel plans. Had to record earlier. And then the Mammoth, Kenneth Grant, decides to commit about 20, 30 minutes after we were done, EJ. So we'll talk about him. We're recording this, this part now, and then the 4 other things that we learned are still applicable. So we will cut to that afterwards. So just a note for everybody watching out there. Let's start with the 3-star defensive tackle, Kenneth Grant, out of Merrillville, Indiana. One of the more underrated prospects in the country, EJ, as we mentioned on a previous video right after he committed. Your thoughts on Michigan being able to seal the deal with him?
Yeah, we kind of hinted that Ken wanted to make a decision sooner rather than later. And one day he was just like, you know what, I'm done with this. And so Ken's not a real social media type. You don't really often see him tweeting about anything. So he just decided to call the coaches up right before they went out to coach practice and told them I'm committing. They sent him a graphic. He posted it, and he went to practice, so nobody would bother him. So it was funny. Me and Clayton did record this video right before he committed, and then I went out to Merrillville to spend some time with him. So now everybody knows that I've been very, very high on Kenneth. I mean, he fits that true nose role in this new defensive scheme. I think he's a guy that can come in and play right away. I think he's very, very underrated by the recruiting services. Just a lot of people haven't come out to the Gary, Indiana area to see him. And that's unfortunate because, I mean, it's really hard to find true nose tackles. And on top of that, it's harder to find true nose tackles that can actually move. He looks as good as you can look at 340 pounds. He's a dancing bear type that also plays along the offensive line. So he starts both ways at that size, similar to Dion Walker, and he looks good doing it. And I think he has great feet, great balance. He, even though he didn't attend very many camps and doesn't do private training or anything like that, he's advanced technically. He gets really good coaching at Merrillville under Brad Seiss. So I really love the Kenneth Grant land, and I think you have to definitely give credit to Sean Nua, who visited him the Friday before he committed. Made the trip out to Merrillville and watched him in a Friday night game right before Michigan, had a game the following day. So I think, big kudos to Nua. This was his best recruiting job during his entire time at Michigan.
Definitely. Huge win for Sean Nua, much needed. And defensive tackle recruiting has kind of had a resurgence in the last 9-10 months. It was a big concern about a year ago at this time. It is looking very, very good right now for Michigan. Moving on to an area of concern a little bit is linebacker, but Michigan able to land 3-star Deuce Spurlock out of Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama. EJ, a land that didn't get a ton of attention from the Michigan community, but kind of more of a high upside guy who can play on the inside, and similar in a way in terms of upside and potential to Aaron Alexander, who they already have as an inside linebacker, 2-star out of Belleville.
Yeah, Spurlock is very, very similar to Alexander, similar in size, about 6'2", 210 right now. Still needs to add some good weight, but he's a very athletic prospect that moves really well sideline to sideline, tremendous straight line speed, ultra productive at the high school level. Had 21 tackles last week, which caught a lot of people's attention, regardless of competition. That's a lot. So he's a guy that, is a great fit for what Michigan's trying to do with their inside linebackers, and that's finding speedy, athletic guys that can add weight and strength. And both Alexander and Spurlock fit that mold. I'm excited to see Spurlock live. I think he has a lot of potential and upside. I'm not exactly sure what I would grade him at because I do want to get a look at him. But he's definitely another intriguing add to a cycle full of intriguing takes.
Definitely. And then the first guy to commit out of this little spurt was Mason Graham, another defensive tackle, this time out of California, plays for powerhouse Servite out there. They're the number 8 team in the country according to Max Preps right now, undefeated, and just pulled off a big win over the weekend. But Mason Graham putting up big-time stats. And, EJ, I'm glad we're talking about this and re-recording this now on Mason Graham because he has notched offers from USC, Oregon, schools nearby on the West Coast. He's still solid with Michigan. You got a chance to see him in between, when we recorded at first and now. So, I think it's kind of a perfect storyline that Mason Graham is probably another underrated guy that is now getting some looks that he probably deserved earlier, but he's still solid with the Wolverines.
Mason's a really, I guess I'd call him an enigma just because, with Kenneth Grant, it's a little understandable that people haven't seen him. Like I said, he's out by Gary, which is kind of, outside of Chicago, far enough outside of Chicago and far enough away from Indianapolis to where, a lot of people aren't going out to see him. With Mason Graham, he plays at Servite. It's a top 10 team in the country in SoCal, in the Trinity League. They play Mater Dei. They play St. John Bosco. Like, how did he get so misranked is my question mark. He did make a big leap from junior to senior year. He had a great start to his senior year, which caught a lot of people's attention, including Michigan. But this was actually a guy that Courtney Morgan, Michigan's new director of player personnel, was already on. He offered him at Fresno State. He had been recruiting Mason since Mason was a freshman. So Courtney did a tremendous job of evaluating him early on. And then, like you mentioned, I think the USC Oregon offers justified, like, okay, this guy really is underrated. Like, he really did fly under the radar. But again, it's a little crazy just because he plays at such a powerhouse program in Servite, which has several other big time D1 recruits as well. So, with Mason, kind of honing in on his skill set, he's not a big nose like Kenneth Grant. It was actually funny. I asked Mason how he fits into Michigan's defensive scheme, and he was like, well, I can play the 3. That's what Sean Newell really wants me to play. So more of the defensive tackle role in this defense as opposed to the nose. I can also play the 4 and the 5, but when it comes to nose, I'll leave that to Kenneth. He's excited to play, right next to Kenneth Grant. And I think they'll complement each other really well. So Mason was excited about Ken, and I know Ken's excited about Mason. And I think Michigan landed 2 studs, and they are 2 of the best lands of this cycle. And they are, again, also both 3 stars, which is just crazy. I think both of them are, again, in desperate need of rankings reevaluations. But Mason, despite those offers, completely solid to Michigan. Very, very happy with his decision.
Yeah, made a nice sack over the weekend as well, and looking like Michigan finding a couple diamonds in the rough, even though, like we mentioned, they're starting to get a little more attention, and still solid to Michigan. So now we will cut back to the rest of the 4 things that we learned in September. Second thing that we learned, the Washington game, from a recruiting standpoint, from a playing standpoint as well, it was a huge success. But certainly from a recruiting standpoint, Michigan really got it done, wowed everybody from commits to big-time targets. You see 5-star Will Johnson there pictured with 5-star defensive back Damani Jackson, who was in attendance and loved his time there. USC commit currently, but they obviously fired Clay Helton. So many storylines when it came out of this weekend, and we talked about a ton of them immediately after. But just in terms of the weekend as a whole, it was just a major, major success.
Yeah, just reflecting back on it, the amount of top targets and highly touted guys on campus was absolutely insane. Look, even in this photo, you have Will and Damani, but behind them, you have 5-star defensive tackle Walter Nolan over Will's shoulder, and you have elite 2023 quarterback Dante Moore over Damani Jackson's shoulder. So it was just a weekend filled with high-end recruits. I think some of the bigger takeaways were, one, you brought on guys that were already committed that you have a chance to flip, one being Damani Jackson. I think Michigan's in a strong position there, especially with USC being in a bit of a disaster after firing Clay Helton. You brought in Amorion Walker, who's currently committed to Notre Dame, and is a guy that Michigan is now in a strong position to flip. You brought in Mason Graham, who flipped from Boise State to Michigan, who we just talked about. So Michigan putting itself in strong positions with these guys committed elsewhere. Another takeaway is just the big targets that were on campus that aren't committed anywhere, like Josh Connerly. I put in a future cast before his visit and feel better about it. I put in a future cast pick for Kenneth Grant before his visit and feel better about it now. Mammoth defensive tackle and one of the top remaining 2022 priorities. Walter Nolan, again, 5-star defensive tackle, was on campus. Another big-time dude, 4-star linebacker Lander Barton was on campus, another key target. So many guys. It's just hard to list them all. Were on campus for this game. 2023 had some big guys too. You know, Dante Moore, he's the crown jewel for next cycle. You had Amir Herring, who's a Rivals 250 and state offensive lineman, make his way onto campus. Jalen Thompson, a Rivals 250 in-state defensive lineman. You had guys from out of the region come, like Rivals 100 linebacker Tackett Curtis from Louisiana. You had Rivals 100 wide receiver Jaylen Brown come in from Miami. So many guys just flooded to campus. And I think Michigan just made a big impression on all of them. The commits were there: Will Johnson, Miles Pollard, Cody Jones, Tyler Morris, Connor Jones, etc. We're all on campus. So again, I think it was an electric atmosphere. The families enjoyed their time. The kids enjoyed their time. It created some positive movement, resulted in a commit from Mason Graham. Resulted in higher confidence in future cast picks like Kenneth Grant, like Deion Walker, who I didn't even mention, another big time guy that was on campus, like Josh Connerly. So overall, really successful weekend, and I think you're going to see even more positive news come out as an extension of that weekend. Even though it's a couple of weeks behind us now, I feel like there's still more positive news that's going to be mostly a direct result of that weekend.
Biggest recruiting weekend for Michigan of the calendar year? Was it the Victor's weekend in June, the barbecue at the Big House, or this September 11th Washington game?
I think it was a Washington game. I think it had the most big names on campus, and I think it was just the atmosphere, the aura of being in the Big House in that type of environment in a night game. It was just it was a spectacle, and I think everybody that was there really took it in and enjoyed it.
Yeah, and this staff has done a great job recruiting, but coming off of what last year was, a bunch of changes in the program, stability questions, I think Michigan on this visit weekend, September 11th, the Washington game, was able to answer some questions about the play on the field and things like that as well, getting off to a good start and dominating Washington, especially physically up front and, in the run game and all that. So it was the first visit weekend that they were actually able to answer some of those questions with substance and proof behind it, which I think is going to be major going forward. The third thing that we learned, the biggest thing that we learned, or third biggest, Notre Dame flip is likely. Amarion Walker, a guy we've talked about increasingly over the last few weeks, is a athlete out of Louisiana, currently committed to the Fighting Irish, but the Wolverines are not giving up, and really right now it looks like it's going to be hard for Notre Dame to hold on to him.
Yeah, so even the guy that still was on your screen, Will Johnson, was working hard on Amarion Walker during his trip to Michigan. I think the Wolverines really blew him away during his time in Ann Arbor. Ron Bellamy has done a terrific job recruiting him. Bellamy played for his high school head coach. He's a Louisiana native, so they've been able to connect on a personal level. I think Walker's been wavering from Notre Dame over the last few weeks. He's still going to take some SEC trips. He has one planned to LSU, one planned to Alabama. But I think both of those schools are recruiting him more so on the defensive side of the ball. I also think Amarion Walker wants to get away from the South. He's an honors student, really kind of fit both Michigan and Notre Dame in a sense, just kind of wanting to get away and go up north to a more prestigious academic program as opposed to LSU or Alabama. But yeah, overall, I think Michigan's done a phenomenal job. They positioned themselves well to flip him. Again, I've said this many times, but Rivals won't allow me to put in flip picks. I don't know why, but if I could, I would have put one in right after his visit. I wrote about it in Into the Blue, which is our weekly recruiting scoop piece, that I would have put in a flip pick. And so I feel strongly about Michigan flipping him. I went out to New Orleans this month and had a chance to see him. And, he's a really intriguing athlete. He's very raw, but he's at about 6'3", 6'4", 170, 175 pounds. Has the versatility to play wide receiver or defensive back. Again, his preference is to play wide receiver, and Michigan is recruiting him as a wide receiver right now. So I feel like Michigan is definitely trending the right way here.
Definitely. The fourth thing that we learned is a guy who named Michigan his leader. Look like trending towards a commitment. 3-star safety Damani Dent out of Jacksonville. Now he's going to slow down a little bit. I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Damani Dent was an interesting one. I did not put in a future cast coming out of his visit because I felt like there could be some movement there with some other schools. So he was a hidden gem. He got some attention after camping with Oregon and really exploding onto the scene after that. He had strong testing numbers there. Oregon offered, Michigan offered soon after that, and now some SEC schools are starting to show some attention there. You have Tennessee, who's showing attention. You have Kentucky, Florida a little bit, and Georgia, which actually hosted him for an unofficial visit. Now, none of those schools have offered, but I think Dent wants to slow things down and see if they do offer. Dent had initially set a commitment date for October 10th. He has pushed that back. So while Michigan remains the leader, there are still moving parts. Oregon is still in there as well and trying to get him back to Eugene for a return visit. Our old friend Mo Linguist at Buffalo is making a personal push. I don't know how interested he would be in Buffalo, but they're still in the mix as well. So yeah, a lot of moving parts with Dent. Again, October 10th was his date, no longer his date. So we'll see what happens from there.
Man, Michigan man Mo Linguist just trying to get on the scene here for some of these more big-time targets. The last thing that we learned, sadly, we're going to have to say goodbye to Dylan Tatum. As we're recording this, currently he's uncommitted, but as you've noticed over on the site and on the channel here over the last few weeks and months, things have really slowed down. Michigan really kind of ending its pursuit a while ago of Dylan Tatum, and Dylan Tatum is a Michigan State Spartan, so now he's the enemy for the Michigan fans out there. But, by all accounts, a great kid and everything like that. Enjoyed our interactions with him here at thewolverine.com. But, EJ, each month over the last few, we've looked back at the month and said, hey, Dylan Tatum still delaying his decision. As of right now, we believe he's about to decide tomorrow. We're recording this on Tuesday. This is coming out later, but I think he's a Michigan State commit as you're watching this.
Yeah, I think Dylan has committed to Michigan State by the time you are watching this. I think we did slow down our conversations about Dylan Tatum, but because he is an in-state kid, because he's a West Bloomfield kid that played for Ron Bellamy, we talked about him quite a bit here on this YouTube channel, mostly because Michigan fans wanted to know about him. But Michigan basically sat down and had a conversation with Dylan over Zoom or over the phone, not in real life. But anyway, they had a conversation with him. I want to say a week before the Washington game, or right about 3 or 4 days before the Washington game, so very early in the month. And they gave Dylan an opportunity to commit. Said, hey, we would take you, and Dylan wanted to wait, and so they had another conversation with him before the Washington game, and they said, hey, we're just going to move on to other options at this point. Dylan was supposed to actually be on campus for the game against Washington, so he had set an official visit. That got canceled, and Michigan decided to completely move on, and so that opened up the door for him to just shut it down now and commit to Michigan State. Obviously, Dylan was torn between Michigan and Michigan State for a long while. He was initially set to commit in April, and that got pushed back all the way to now, September. But I think Michigan finally saying, you know what, we're good, gave him the green light to say, all right, I'm going to commit to Michigan State. And to be completely honest, even if Michigan hadn't backed away from Dylan at the beginning of the month, I still feel like in his heart, for whatever reason, he still really wanted to go to Michigan State. I think his head was with Michigan. I think his heart was with Michigan State. He grew up in a family full of Michigan State fans. I think the connection to Ron Bellamy and Donovan Edwards, as well as the academic opportunities at Michigan, which are obviously better than Michigan State, the resources at Michigan, the big house, all of that's better than what Michigan State can offer. But at the end of the day, I think he felt most comfortable at Michigan State. And I think that's where his heart was. And I think that's what he felt was the right fit for him. And so you can't knock him for feeling that way. And I think there were a lot of, again, connections there with Bellamy, with Donovan, and, him going to Ann Arbor quite a bit. But again, at the end of the day, Dylan always mentioned comfort. And I think even though there was pressure there because of all those factors, the comfort level was at Michigan State. And I felt like Michigan State really pitched him on being the guy, the face of the class. And that's not necessarily what he could be at Michigan when you have Will Johnson committed, who is the guy in the face of the class. So again, a lot of different factors that Dylan was considering throughout the process. But he ends up at Michigan State. I really enjoyed my time covering Dylan. Nothing bad to say about him. Really good player. I think he's going to be a solid player for Michigan State down the line, and we'll see how things go against Michigan. It'll be fun seeing Bellamy and Donovan go up against Dylan in a few years.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that's an important distinction, your explanation there with Michigan moving on, but it's not because they were in a great spot. Like, they gave him the opportunity to commit and everything like that. So it's not like it was just, they wanted him to commit down, throughout that recruitment, but couldn't get him to, and obviously then decided to allocate resources elsewhere. They really like Cody Jones, who I think has been a stud. You've mentioned these commit roundups I've done each week. He's putting up big-time numbers, not only defensively where he's going to play in college, but on the offensive side too, an explosive athlete. So Cody Jones, one of the guys in the defensive backfield, along with several others that Michigan feels really good about.
Really quick, Clay. You brought up a good point. The staff loves Cody Jones, and Cody's a very similar player to Dylan. Dylan's about 5'10", 5'11". Cody in that same range, about 5'11", 6 foot. Both nickel guys, nickel safety guys that can also play corner. So they saw them in a similar light. So Michigan already has a guy committed in that position in Cody Jones. And they still really, really like Zeke Berry, who's an Arizona commit, who I'll actually have a lot more on over at the Wolverine, or I've already written it since you're watching this on Friday. But Zeke Berry, definitely a guy to keep an eye on. So they had some other options they liked. They already had a commit in Cody Jones, who what I think was wavering a little bit in the summer, but his commitment has become more solid. And I kind of give Dylan an ultimatum and then decide to move on.
Definitely. So there you have it, the 5 biggest things that we learned about Michigan recruiting in the month of September. An eventful month with Michigan having that big visit weekend we talked about, starting off the season on the field, hitting the road, recruiting, landing a couple commits. So that is your September recap. Stay tuned for all things Michigan football recruiting at thewolverine.com.